Okay, so for today's class we're going to be making these just simple little pattern weights. You can make these with or without the ribbon. So you'll need 2 squares, 4 inches square for each one that you want to make. So 2 squares, 2-inch bit of ribbon if you wish to insert the ribbon, just gives you something to grab when you pick them up. You don't need to put that in if you don't want to. You'll need something to fill it with. I'm using just rice. Just long grain rice, and then a funnel. I've actually got a funnel, but if you haven't got one of them, you can make one out of a bit of paper. I'm using a seam gauge just to use the point turner on it for turning it through, and I've got a fabric glue pen to help me along. I've also got just a pair of snips, and you also want a sewing needle for sewing up at the end, and I'm just using a white coordinating thread. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to stitch around 3 sides. Now we're doing roughly 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so you can just measure that with your seam gauge if you've got that. I'm just putting a couple of marks on just to give me a rough idea. Doesn't matter if it's a perfect 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, it's just little squares. So just to give you an idea of where to go, I'm just doing that. So we're only going to sew around 3 sides at the moment. So I'm just going to start here, sew around 3 sides. Don't forget to backstitch at the start and the finish. So I'm just going to start slightly on the fabric, then it doesn't eat my fabric into the machine because it's only lightweight. I'm using a size 70 needle because I'm sewing on polycotton and it's quite lightweight. So just stop with your needle down, lift your foot and turn. Again, turn. And you could pin this beforehand if you needed to. Now I'm going to backstitch before I go off the end because otherwise it will eat my fabric. So I'm just going to cut off those corners close to the stitches without cutting through them. That just gives you a neater point. Okay, now at this point, if you wanted to, you could press your seams. I'm just going to do it close to the edge. Just makes lining up seams easier. Okay, so I'm just finger pressing those. You can go all the way to the top. So once you've done that, so there's your flat square. So if you just put your hand, lift up at the top and down at the bottom, which pulls it into the Toblerone shape, pulls it so your 2 seams are going to meet. So you want those 2 seams lined up. And then just stick a pin. Just stick a pin in there. And we're going to sew across here now, across this edge. I'm just going to mark a turning gap because we need to turn it through. So I'm just putting a couple of marks in, and we're going to stitch from here to here and from here to here. So you need to backstitch when you get here, from backstitch at both ends and backstitch at both ends here. If you want to put the ribbon in, now's the time to do it. So just get your glue stick. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue there, stick the 2 ends together, and then push it into this here where I'm going to stitch it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of glue on the seam edge there, put that inside so that your loop is going inside, and just line it up roughly with the edge. You can have it sticking out a little bit, then you know you've got it in the right place. Okay, so that saves you having to put any pins in. So we'll just go back to the machine and sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So we'll just go back. Back stitch at your mark and come back to it. Lift your needle, lift your foot, and then just pull it across. Saves you snipping your threads. Put that down and then back stitch there. A couple of stitches there. And then back to this edge. And I'm going to back stitch just before I get to the edge. Otherwise it will suck the material down into machine because it's only polycotton and it's quite lightweight. Okay, so that's stitch there. Okay, so we can just snip those 2 points as well, just gives it a slightly sharper point there. A bit of extra ribbon, and then we're just going to turn that through now. Now I'm just going to give this a bit of a finger press here, because that's where we're going to sew it after. So now we want to just fill this with rice using your funnel. So basically just stick a funnel in the hole and fill it with rice. If you're like me, you'll probably end up with more rice everywhere else. I'm just going to leave it at that. I could put a bit more in, but I just risk it all spilling out. So I'm just going to use my glue stick and just add a little bit of glue just to make this easier to close up so that the rice doesn't spill out while you're sewing it. Just hold that together. Okay, so all there is left to do now is just to stitch up that opening. I've just threaded a needle. I've put both ends through the needle, so I've got a loop at one end. So I can just bring my needle through and then catch it through that loop, and that just fastens the end off. And then you can either over stitch it, or you can do a ladder stitch. I might do that actually, where you go in, put your needle in like this and through on the one side, and then go through the opposite side same way, lined up, and then just keep repeating that. So across on the opposite side, just in and out sideways. You don't have to pull it too tight till you've done a couple of stitches, and then just come in the opposite side, do the same. So you're making what looks like a little ladder. When you've done a few, you can pull that and it closes up the seam so it's kind of invisible. I've made a loop there. I'm just going to pull that through so it pulls it tight. I'll do that a couple of times. I'm not a big hand sewer, so make a loop, go through to make a loop, put your needle through the loop and pull it off, pull it tight. Right, okay, so I've pulled that through and I'm just going to bury it in the actual project. So just go in through the seam and I'm just going to come out anywhere on the other side. Give it a tug and then just pull that off and it pulls back inside. So there we go. So there we go. There's your little pattern weight made. There's a pink one. Depending on where you put the ribbon, there we go, that sits that way up. So depending on where you put the ribbon determines whether you'll have a seam or not. So if you put it in like I showed you in the video, then it'll be at the back here and you'll have no seam if this is your front. If you're not bothered, then you can just put it at the top when you're sewing your squares together, and as long as it's in one of the seams. So there we go, that's two little pattern weights.